Hello, welcome back. I hope everyone had a great weekend, phenomenal, restful, relaxing weekend. I hope everyone's quarantining and still remaining socially distant as we see the coronavirus starting to resurge. Yeah, this is where we're at. We're in basically a third world country that does not know how to react to public health crises appropriately. So be mindful about it and be considerate. So, anyways, today's video is going to be about residential segregation and how that remains such a prominent pillar of white supremacy in America today. We are 52 years removed from the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but I mean the residential segregation and just the disparity of black homeownership compared to white homeownership and black wealth and stuff like that remains just very prominent, very prevalent in the world today. So I'm just going to read off some of the things that I found. More than 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, black-white segregation remains strikingly high and imposes unfair burdens on black people even when they have the same income or education levels as whites. ND housing segregation, which government officials engineered as a tool of white supremacy, poses one of the largest threats to racial equality in America today. So, to take it back to the New Deal and the Depression and everything, when housing and homeownership became a major policy for middle class Americans, white people were given priority and given I won't even just say priority. White people were given the exclusive access to federal loans and the ability to buy a house and move out of the city and move into a suburb. So typically higher levels of education and income translate into access to high opportunity neighborhoods and the possibility of accumulating greater wealth. In the case of African Americans, however, residential segregation impedes access to middle class neighborhoods with strong schools and strongly appreciating home values. In fact, black-white residential segregation helps explain two astonishing facts. Middle class blacks live in neighborhoods with higher poverty rates than lower income whites. And African American households headed by an individual with a bachelor's degree have less wealth on average than white households headed by an individual who lacks a high school degree. So, again, I feel like all of this winds and connects and layers on top of one another because white supremacy, just systemic racism, it is a very tangled, just layered thing. It all goes hand in hand. It all finds itself overlapping with something else I might have talked about in a previous video, or something else I might talk about in a later video. All these things wind into one another. So where people live affects much of their lives, their access to transportation, education, employment opportunities, and good health care. Black-white segregation has contributed significantly to the enormous wealth gap between these races and their grossly unequal access to strong public education opportunities. So as we know, property taxes fund your public schools, and houses with the lower property taxes are filled with black and brown people. So then their schools are underfunded and they're not getting the proper education. They just don't have the money to give their students proper education. You can't blame the teachers and the faculty and staff if they just don't have the resources. And teachers have to go out and spend money out of their own pockets, taking money out of their own households to pay for the supplies they need for their students. And so, but then you go to a suburb like Westlake, Ohio, if any of you are familiar with that, and you see these just beautiful, clearly very well-funded, well-manicured public schools, and because those property taxes are higher, and that itself is a means of oppression, and that itself is a racist policy, because the government knew what they were doing when they based public education funding on property taxes, because they know who's going to have the lower property taxes. They know who's going to be living in these neighborhoods because they force them into those neighborhoods. They aren't surprised, and I don't want us to be surprised anymore about it either. That's why I'm making this video. And because homes are typically the largest financial asset for Americans, segregated markets significantly reduce the accumulated wealth of black people. I hate that. Black people. This phenomenon helps explain why the median income for black households is 59% that of white households, but black median household net worth is much lower, just 8% of white median household net worth. And as I mentioned in the previous video, this is all an effect of redlining. When the government decided that they were going to grant loans and grant funding to middle-class Americans to buy homes and such, they shaded the areas with black people as being high risk and to not insure their loans, being high-risk loans, and then in turn they would not insure the loan, and black people can't get a home loan to buy the house. So when this housing boom was happening with the New Deal and FDR was creating all these social programs, black people were systemically and institutionally left out of the party again. And so racial residential segregation also means that African Americans are more likely to be steered towards high poverty neighborhoods, further contributing to the opportunity gap. Typically, families with higher levels of income have access to more affluent neighborhoods. Yet, even middle-class black families are more likely to live in concentrated poverty and thus more likely to send their children to high-poverty schools with low-income whites. In fact, sociologist Patrick Sharkey finds that middle-class African-American households earn $100,000 or more per year. I think I read that wrong. In fact, sociologist Patrick Sharkey finds that middle-class African-American households earning $100,000 or more per year live in neighborhoods with the same disadvantages as the average white household earning less than $30,000 per year. So then we start to see the fruition of that statement. You got to work twice as hard to get half of what they have. This is you have to work 3 times as hard to get the same as what they have. You have a black household earning $100,000 plus a year, but are only privy to their white counterparts earning $30,000 or less, only privy to that neighborhood that they live in. And so black people having to go above and beyond, having to be in the 6-figure range to get something decent. Like, they can't even go and get the house that they are qualified for. I was reading something. It was from a article I was reading in one of my sociology classes that I think I have linked in my notes. But it was saying how black people, even when they had the money and they were coming to the table with all the right qualifications, they were not showed all the houses that they qualified for, because the realtor was told that if they sell this house to a black person, property value will go down, white people are going to leave, the neighborhood's going to fall to shambles, and then you just you don't and then that becomes policy, and it just never changes. And as I just read, black people are more likely to be steered towards the impoverished neighborhoods, and then when you are in these neighborhoods that don't have resources and funding, and the schools are trashed, they don't have any type of recreational things, there is nothing in this neighborhood besides a bunch of rundown houses and rundown buildings, and then you wonder why crime is happening. Make it make sense. But furthermore, because racial residential segregation, low-income African Americans are much less likely to be afforded the opportunity to attend socioeconomically integrated schools, where low-income students perform as much as 2 grade levels higher than low-income students in high poverty schools. According to a 2017 analysis by Emma Garcia of the Economic Policy Institute, less than 1 in 5 poor black children had access to predominantly middle-class school, compared to almost half of poor white children. So, as I said, where you live determines so much. It determines education, as I keep saying. It determines the quality of the education you're going to get. Where you live determines the quality of food that you're going to get. We see food deserts are often coincide with black residents, and we see food desert. Just to go into a little bit more about that, is when you have a neighborhood with like one grocery store in it. You have like blocks on blocks on blocks of people limited to only shopping at Save-A-Lot. And this is speaking from experience. I used to live off 130th and 130th in Cleveland, and Save-A-Lot was what I want to say the nearest spot, and I guess you can go to Mark's up the street, but you go to Westlake or you go to Rocky River, Ohio, and you have Whole Foods and you have Heinen's and Giant Eagle, and you name it, they have it for you to shop at, and the food is usually higher quality, and the prices are usually even better. But then in these black neighborhoods, you have a food desert. And so all of this ties into segregation, residential segregation, I'm sorry, and just how much your residence and where you are placed in your city impacts your life. And I mentioned this in my previous video, Spatial Justice and the Right to Your City. That was in a sociology article I had to read for class. And so that just talked about black people being confined to, it was specific to Chicago, the Black Belt, quote unquote. Black people being confined to these small pockets of the city and then not having any other part of the city available to them. Chicago, one of the most segregated cities I've ever been to in my life. The South is black, the North is white. And you have, like I've been in classes with people who have never been past downtown. And first time they came up north is when they came to Loyola. And so just actually granting black people, black and brown people, the access to their city as their white counterparts have. And that's like spatial justice in a nutshell. That's not the entire scope of it, but that's really what it's getting at. It's getting at having the right to access your city and just sink your teeth in everything that you can, just as everyone else does. Just as someone from a suburb can come to the city and enjoy it and enjoy all the perks that it may give, especially a city like Chicago, having students on the South Side being able to have that same access, or just giving them the right tools in their own neighborhood to access their community where they live. Maybe they don't have to go up north. Maybe they don't need to go downtown. They can, if you pour money into where they live and take it out of the Chicago Police Department and put it into the community, I'm pretty sure something's going to turn around. I promise something's going to turn around. I'm not in policy. I'm not in politics. I'm not in anything. But I do have a brain. So, furthermore, we're going to get back into the video. Black people also generally prefer integrated neighborhoods and schools. In fact, a recent Pew survey found that black people are much more supportive of integrated school than whites. I wonder why. 68% of black people say that students should go to schools that are racially and ethnically mixed, even if it means some students don't go to the school in their local community, compared to just 35% of whites. 60% of black people said that, compared to 35% of white people saying that. And then that leads me to white flight, when black people moving into the neighborhood and any non-white person moving into the neighborhood, because it even gave a statistic about Asian Americans and Latinx Americans moving into the neighborhoods, and just the statistics of white people fleeing the neighborhood and just going somewhere else. And I think it said for every 2 non-white people, 5 white families left. Yes, that is exactly what this says. Let me source this. Coming straight from Pew again. So yeah, for every 2 non-white families, 5 white families leave. And then that started happening in about the 70s. White flight became a major like a buzzword, I guess. And so I don't want this video to be too long. I just want to like I said, give an overview, give us something to give people watching something to start with, because I always say you don't know what you're looking up. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. You don't know what you don't know until someone lets you know. So I want to just give you all some food for thought. Maybe you research it further after this. I'm going to talk about the history of this for a little bit. In 1933, faced with a housing shortage, the federal government began a program explicitly designed to increase and segregate America's housing stock. Author Richard Rothstein says the housing programs begun under the New Deal and were tantamount to a state-sponsored system of segregation. The government's efforts were to primarily designed to provide housing to white middle-class and lower-class families, he says. African Americans and other people of color were left out in the new suburban communities and pushed instead into the urban housing projects. And just to go back, just to circle back around to that before I move on, the projects, when they were created, it was white and black people in there. And as I just read, when the government was designing housing initiatives and trying to get these bills passed for Americans to own their own home, they were primarily for white people. And so once white people start fleeing the projects, then you see black people really filling up the projects. And as we see now in 2020, the Black American ghetto is a product of whiteness. It is a product of white supremacy. The ghetto, as we know it, is a product of white supremacy. White people excluded non-white people from accessing the same funding and the same privileges that everyone was supposed to have as an American citizen, and having the privilege of having upward mobility was not afforded to them. So then when they live in these impoverished neighborhoods and in these projects or whatever, then you want to point the finger at that they're lazy and they don't want to do this and they don't want to do that, when they were not even a thought on the policymakers' mind when they were writing up these bills and these laws to get America back on track after the Depression. It was not to get black people back on track. It was to get white people back on track and black people get it how you live. So the government's efforts were primarily designed... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm rereading that. The Federal Housing Administration was established in 1934, furthered the segregation efforts by refusing to insure mortgages in and near African American neighborhoods, a policy known as redlining, as I was just talking about. At the same time, the FHA was subsidizing builders who were mass-producing entire subdivisions for whites with the requirement that none of the homes be sold to African Americans. So, again, that was institutional. That was inside of the. This was an intergovernment. What am I trying to say? Intra-government. Just decision. I think that's just the best word I can put on it. Intra-government decision that they are going to exclude black people from ever owning homes. And as we know, owning a home is a great way to accumulate wealth, because then when these white people bought these homes and the neighborhoods start coming up, businesses got in the neighborhoods, then they were able to sell these houses. I want to say, I put it in here. They were able to sell these houses for about 3 times as much as they bought it for, and then buy another house. And then they buy this other house, and that accumulates more wealth. And then their kids are now growing up. They moved into this house. They had some children. Now it's time to send them to college. And now you're able to send children to college because you've accumulated wealth over these last maybe 20 years, we'll say. And then then you start to see the gap, because black people never had that opportunity. So black people don't have the opportunity to sell their house for 3 times as much and go buy a nice house and send their kids to college and start to create this generational wealth as white people were able to. And as the government made sure that white people were able to, the government put a roadblock in front of the black community to make sure that they would never catch up, that we would never catch up. And so I think that kind of goes. I'm gonna say this because this talks about the 60s for a little bit. Black families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 40s, 50s, and 60s by the FHA, Federal Housing Administration, gained none of the equity appreciation the whites gained. So the daily city development of San Francisco or Levittown or any of the others in between across the country, those homes in the late 40s and 50s sold for about 2 to 3 times their national median income. They were affordable to working class families with the FHA or VA mortgage. black people were equally able to afford those homes as whites, but were prohibited for buying them. So when they were first sold, black people were in the same place to buy them as their white counterparts. But when the white people sold their homes for 300,000, 400,000, at the minimum six to eight times the national median income, black people, those houses were no longer affordable to the black community because now these home values have skyrocketed. So now black people are just too far behind the race. And so then we get the Fair Housing Act in 1968, which really didn't do much because, as I said, we are 52 years removed from that. And I think now now in 2020, we might be seeing a bit of the unraveling of redlining, like very little bit. And I'm not gonna say that this was exclusive to homes. Businesses redline, Starbucks redlines, Whole Foods redlines. They go to neighborhoods with predominantly white population. You're not going to see a Whole Foods around black people. You're not going to see a Starbucks around too many black people. And so once redlining, because the government encourages them to go to these white neighborhoods because they tell them that going to a black neighborhood is not going to bring them any money. But going to a non-white neighborhood, I'll say, is not going to bring them the profit that they expect. And so and then you get these businesses and just these amenities in these neighborhoods causing the home values to go up, and none of it in these non-white neighborhoods. And and this creates, just what we see today when we go to a ghetto, quote unquote, where we go to just a underfunded, underserved community, and we see the devastation and the dilapidation of it. And this is, as I said, a product of whiteness. It is a product of white supremacy, a product of racial inequality, again in America. Something else, a product of racial inequality in America. And so, I think that is where I'm going to leave it today. Stay radical, stay loud, stay active. Find petitions to sign. Elijah McClain's case just got reopened. I think he had like 2 million signatures. So just stay vigilant, and we are going to win. I know it. And thank you.